March 15th, 2024, 3:47 a.m. Alaska Standard Time. Two American fighter pilots are jolted from standby rest by a klaxon that cuts through the hardened concrete walls of Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson like a physical force. The call comes from NORAD's Combined Aerospace Operations Center, buried beneath Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. Sector Commander Brigadier General Patricia Holloway delivers 9 words that land in the briefing room like a verdict. MiG-31K airborne, Kinzhal attached. Alaska, ADIZ breached. Scramble now. 14 seconds later, the first F-22 Raptor is rolling. 4 minutes and 23 seconds after that, 2 of the most sophisticated air superiority fighters ever built are climbing through -31°F darkness at Mach 1.8, pointed northwest toward the Bering Strait. They are not there to observe. They are not there to escort. They are there to stop a hypersonic missile system from reaching a release point that would make interception mathematically impossible. What happens next would remain buried in classified Pentagon files for 21 months. The incident wouldn't surface in any press briefing. No senator would mention it during Armed Services Committee hearings. No defense analyst would cite it in any published report, until late 2025, when a FOIA request from the Pacific Defense Research Consortium, a nonprofit based in Arlington, Virginia, pried loose 47 pages of NORAD radar telemetry, cockpit data logs, and internal after-action report stamped secret//NOFORN. Documents that describe, in the clinical language of military bureaucracy, the first documented combat engagement between American F-22 Raptors and a Kinzhal-armed platform. 11 minutes. That's how long it took from scramble order to confirmed platform destruction. One of the most consequential aerial engagements since the Cold War. And almost no one knows it happened. This is the story of March 15th, 2024. The intercept that rewrote the classified playbook on hypersonic threat response and recovered intelligence about the Kinzhal's guidance architecture that defense analysts have since called the most significant hypersonic intelligence windfall in over a decade. To understand why this engagement matters, you need to understand what the KH-47M2 Kinzhal actually is. Not the propaganda version. The technical reality. The MiG-31K Foxhound is itself a formidable aircraft. It entered Soviet service in 1981 as one of the fastest interceptors ever built. Top speed in a clean configuration exceeds Mach 2.8. Service ceiling reaches 67,600 feet. The aircraft was designed to chase down and eliminate American cruise missiles and bombers before they could reach Soviet airspace. It is large, powerful, and built for extreme performance at altitude. The K variant of the MiG-31 is a dedicated missile carrier. The internal gun was removed to make room for additional fuel. The weapons pylons were structurally reinforced to carry the weight of the Kinzhal. The crew of 2, pilot and weapons system operator, fly a profile calibrated around one objective: get the weapon to release point. The KH-47M2. Kinzhal itself is not like other Russian missiles. Russia's other long-range standoff weapons, systems like the KH-101 cruise missile or the Caliber naval variant, fly at subsonic or barely transonic speeds. Intercepting them is difficult, but achievable. The existing air defense architecture built over decades is designed around those threat profiles. The Kinzhal operates in a different category entirely. At launch, the weapon accelerates to speeds between Mach 4 and Mach 10. It maneuvers during its terminal approach phase, which defeats traditional ballistic missile interceptors that assume a predictable, calculable trajectory. Its operational range when launched from the MiG-31K platform exceeds 2,000 kilometers under favorable conditions. That range means a Foxhound crew can release the weapon while still flying over international waters, well outside the reach of any ground-based interceptor system and outside any realistic fighter intercept window. Or so the theory went. The Kinzhal was first publicly unveiled by Vladimir Putin in a staged presentation at the Manej Central Exhibition Hall in Moscow on March 1, 2018. He called it invincible. The word choice was deliberate and calculated. Russia had spent years constructing a strategic narrative around hypersonic weapons as the equalizer that could neutralize American conventional superiority built up over decades of post-Cold War defense investment. The Kinzhal was the centerpiece of that narrative. At the time, senior American defense officials privately acknowledged the challenge. Classified assessments circulating within the Pentagon in 2018 and 2019 noted that a weapon moving at Mach 10 in the terminal phase gives ground-based interceptors a reaction window measured in seconds, not minutes. The geometry of intercept at those speeds is brutal. Traditional air defense calculus, built around intercepting subsonic cruise missiles and subsonic to supersonic ballistic re-entry vehicles, breaks down against a maneuvering hypersonic target. The formal defense community response was a push for new interceptor programs. The Glide Phase Interceptor Program. Enhanced Patriot Variants. Long-range hypersonic defense concepts funded at approximately $4.7 billion across fiscal years 2022 through 2025. All of them aimed at developing new dedicated systems to address the hypersonic threat. But there was a second possible approach that had never been publicly tested in actual combat conditions. What if you didn't intercept the missile? What if you eliminated the launch platform before the missile ever left the aircraft? That concept, platform denial before weapon release, had been quietly wargamed by F-22 pilots at Elmendorf-Richardson and at the Air Force Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada since approximately 2021. The concept was straightforward in theory. In practice, it required threading an operational needle with zero margin for error. You would need to find the MiG-31K beyond visual range, using sensor fusion data from multiple sources simultaneously. Lock it with sufficient track quality before it reached its calculated release point. Achieve a valid AIM-12OD firing solution against a fast-moving, potentially maneuvering target at extreme range under Arctic atmospheric conditions. Fire. And confirm the platform's destruction before the Kinzhal could be released, even in a degraded scenario where the pilot was incapacitated, but an automated release sequence had already been initiated. Every step of that chain had to work in sequence without failure. Every second mattered. The NORAD radar telemetry released in late 2025 shows exactly how close the margin was on March 15, 2024. The Russian flight profile that morning was not random. It followed a pattern that NORAD intelligence analysts had been tracking and documenting for 14 months before the engagement. Beginning in January 2023, Russian long-range aviation began conducting a specific category of sortie out of Anadyr Air Base on the Chukotka Peninsula, approximately 697 kilometers northwest of the Bering Strait. These sorties differed from standard Bear bomber patrol runs in a specific and operationally significant way. They were probing for reaction time data. Each sortie would approach the Alaska ADIZ boundary, hold at or near the line for a measured period, then withdraw to Russian airspace. NORAD scrambled intercept fighters in response to every significant intrusion, as protocol required. The Russian crews were watching and recording. How fast did American fighters reach intercept altitude? What heading and altitude profile did they fly? How close did they approach before committing to an intercept track? What was the measurable gap between initial radar track acquisition and the geometry required for a firing solution, if the American intent were hostile rather than escort? 14 months of carefully spaced sorties generated a detailed operational picture of American response patterns and timelines. The MiG-31K sortie on March 15th was something fundamentally different. It wasn't probing, it was executing. The aircraft departed Anadyr Air Base at approximately 2:51 a.m. Alaska Standard Time. Flight tracking reconstructed from the declassified NORAD radar telemetry shows it flew a northwest to southeast heading that maintained a precise position just outside the Alaska ADIZ boundary for the first 19 minutes of flight. An F-35C from the 90th Fighter Squadron was already airborne on routine patrol, but positioned too far south to affect the intercept geometry. The MiG-31K crew was flying the approach corridor their previous months of probing had identified as the gap. Then, at 3:41 a.m., the Foxhound turned southeast and crossed the ADIZ line at a specific geographic point 340 miles northwest of Nome, Alaska, over international waters in the northern Bering Sea. The NORAD radar system flagged the track within 8 seconds of ADIZ penetration. Elmendorf-Richardson's alert crew, the 2 pilots assigned to the 90th Fighter Squadron's alert commitment that morning, were notified at 3:43 a.m. The scramble order came at 3:47 a.m. At that moment, the MiG-31K was flying at an estimated 3,000 feet altitude, indicated airspeed 580 knots, on a heading that a standard threat trajectory model projected would bring it to its optimal Kinzhal release point in approximately 19 minutes. 19 minutes. That was the entire operational window available from scramble order to the moment the weapon could leave the aircraft and become essentially unstoppable. The F-22 pilots had effectively less than that, because they weren't just racing to physically intercept the aircraft. They were racing to achieve a valid beyond visual range firing solution before the MiG-31K crew realized they were being targeted. Here's what most people miss about the tactical problem those Raptor pilots faced. If the Foxhound crew detected incoming American fighters and recognized a credible BVR threat, Russian standing doctrine and operational instinct would push them to execute an emergency early weapon release. A pilot who knows he is about to be engaged has every rational incentive to release his weapon immediately, even outside optimal parameters, even at a suboptimal launch point, and extract whatever operational value remains from the mission. That scenario would have meant an inbound Kinzhal, possibly not on its ideal program target solution, possibly at suboptimal speed and altitude for maximum range, but still a hypersonic weapon entering American airspace with minimal realistic intercept options. Ground-based systems in Alaska were not configured or positioned to engage a Kinzhal at the trajectory and speed parameters of an early suboptimal release. The timeline was too compressed. The Raptor pilots had to achieve sensor lock on the MiG-31K without alerting the Foxhound crew that they were being actively tracked. This meant managing radar emissions with precise discipline, using the F-22's low probability of intercept radar modes, and coordinating their approach geometry to minimize the angular presentation of their own radar emissions to the Foxhound's threat warning receiver system. The AIM-12OD, Advanced Medium-Range Air-to-Air Missile, was the weapon of choice. The D variant carries an improved seeker, a two-way data link allowing mid-course guidance updates from the launching aircraft, and a longer effective range than earlier AMRAAM variants. Its effective engagement range in the BVR role under favorable conditions exceeds 100 miles. At the engagement range of 178 miles, the shot was at the extreme edge of what the weapon's guidance could manage with marginal track data. The AIM-12OD's unit cost sits at approximately $1.8 million per missile at current Air Force contract pricing. Both missiles launched on March 15th represented a combined expenditure of roughly $3.6 million. Against a platform carrying a Kinzhal with an estimated program cost of approximately $12 million to $18 million per weapon, that exchange ratio was favorable. Against the potential cost of a Kinzhal impact on a target in the Pacific Theater, the math was not even close. The 90th Fighter Squadron's 2 alert aircraft had been scrambled together, with the lead pilot, identified in declassified documents only as Falcon 1, acting as flight lead. Falcon 2 flew the tactical wingman role. Both aircraft carried a full weapons load, including 4 AIM-12OD missiles, each plus 2 AIM-9X. Sidewinder short-range missiles for the visual engagement envelope that no one expected to need. At Mach 1.8 supercruise speed, the F-22s were covering roughly 1,800 feet per second. They were climbing through 45,000 feet, above the Arctic weather layer that sat at approximately 28,000 feet and generating the electromagnetic interference conditions that would complicate the shot. The first Raptor achieved radar lock on the MiG-31K at 4:02 a.m. The second aircraft confirmed independent track 17 seconds later. The MiG-31K crew, according to electronic signals intelligence data that appears in the FOIA documentation as a referenced annex, showed no indication of reactive maneuvering or enhanced electronic countermeasures activity. No emergency squawks, no frequency changes on their communications suite that would indicate elevated crew awareness, no course deviation. They didn't know the Raptors were there. And then something changed that nearly unraveled the entire operation. I spent considerable time working through the declassified after-action reports from the NORAD analysis section, and one technical notation kept pulling my attention back. It appears in a footnote on page 31 of the radar telemetry analysis section, and it almost never made the coverage cycle because the language is dry and buried in appendix material. But once you understand what it means operationally, the entire engagement reads differently. At 4:03 a.m., 17 seconds after Falcon 1 achieved radar lock, the MiG-31K executed a 15-degree course correction to the south-southeast that effectively moved its projected release point timeline 7 minutes ahead of the original trajectory model. The crew had not detected the Raptors. The course correction was not a defensive reaction to the lock. But someone, somewhere in the command and control chain feeding guidance to that crew, had pushed them to accelerate their timeline. Whether that was a ground controller responding to some other sensor input, a pre-planned contingency in the mission briefing triggered by a time check, or something else the documents don't clarify. What the radar telemetry shows with precision is the effect on the intercept geometry. The accelerated course change cut the Raptor pilot's available window from approximately 4 minutes to under 90 seconds. Both AIM-12OD missiles had to leave their pylons within 90 seconds, or the MiG-31K would reach its adjusted release point. There was a simultaneous technical problem that Falcon 1's systems data log documents in clinical detail. The F-22A's AN/APG 77 active electronically scanned array radar is among the most sophisticated airborne sensors ever placed in a production fighter aircraft. At the engagement range and under those atmospheric conditions, the system was providing intermittent track quality data that the fire control computer flagged as marginal. Arctic air masses at that altitude, approximately 38,000 feet above the Bering Sea in mid-March, create specific electromagnetic interference patterns related to temperature inversion layers and moisture density gradients. These conditions can degrade radar resolution against certain target profiles. The MiG-31K is a large aircraft with a significant radar cross-section. It isn't a stealth platform, but the interference was sufficient to generate a tracking quality flag on Falcon 1's fire control display. A marginal tracking quality flag does not prevent a missile launch. The fire control system will allow weapon release with a marginal flag, but it introduces statistical uncertainty into the firing solution calculation. The pilot's tactical computer was showing an estimated probability of guidance success that fell within acceptable parameters for combat engagement, but was not a comfortable number under ideal training conditions. In wargame simulations and training scenarios, pilots are taught to wait for better track data before committing to a long-range shot. Better track data means higher probability of guidance, means conserving expensive missiles for shots that will connect. In this specific engagement, waiting for better track data was not an option. The window was 90 seconds in closing. Falcon 1 had approximately 40 seconds to make the call, including the time required for the weapon's motor to achieve proper separation and guidance acquisition. He made it. At 4:04 a.m., at a measured range of 178 miles off the Alaskan coastline, the first AIM-12OD separated from Falcon 1's F-22 and went active on its booster motor. 4 seconds later, Falcon 2's AIM-12OD launched. Both missiles activated their onboard active radar seekers and data link receivers within seconds of release. Both began the guided flight profile that would take them toward the MiG-31K at a closing speed that exceeded Mach 4. The MiG-31K crew had no warning of the launch. The first indication that anything was wrong came approximately 43 seconds after launch, when the missile's own onboard radar seeker emissions triggered the Foxhound's threat warning receiver. At that point, the crew had a few seconds at most to react. The Kinzhal was still mounted. The weapons system operator's ejection from the aircraft was recorded on NORAD radar as a brief radar return change. The pilot appears to have initiated an evasive maneuver. Neither action affected the outcome. The first AIM-12OD impacted the MiG-31K at 4:11 a.m. The second missile detonated 3 seconds later within the expanding debris cloud of the first impact. Both crew members were confirmed non-recoverable. The Kinzhal was destroyed in the engagement. its propulsion section and guidance package breaking apart under the combined detonation overpressure and the hypersonic aerodynamic forces of the debris field. 11 minutes and 24 seconds from scramble order to confirmed platform destruction. The intercept was over. But the story that would follow, the intelligence exploitation program, the policy debates, the classified program adjustments that rippled outward from those 11 minutes was just beginning. And at the center of what came next was a question nobody anticipated. When the USS Milius, a Flight 2A Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, commissioned in April 2017 at a baseline program cost of approximately $1.84 billion, was diverted from its scheduled patrol route in the Bering Sea to the debris field coordinates 2 days after the engagement. The expectation was a documentation and characterization mission. Photograph the debris, catalog what was visible, assess whether any significant hardware had survived impact and remained on or near the surface. What the Milius crew found when they reached the site on March the 17th was more than anyone in the operations chain had anticipated. The Kinzhal's propulsion section had separated from the warhead and guidance package on impact and had descended in a relatively intact configuration to a depth of approximately 340 feet. The guidance package itself had broken apart, but remained in a concentrated debris field rather than scattering widely across the seafloor. The combination of the initial AIM-12 OD detonation geometry, the altitude of impact, and the angle of the debris fall had created what the salvage assessment called a favorable terminal dispersion pattern. In less technical terms, enough of the weapons survived the engagement to be recovered and analyzed. The recovery operation itself faced conditions that pushed its operational support assets to their limits. The Bering Sea, in mid-March, is not a benign operating environment under any circumstances. Water temperatures at the debris field location were measured at -1 degree Celsius. Surface wind speeds during the first 48 hours of the operation averaged 35 knots, with sustained gusts to 52 knots. Sea state was running between 4 and 5 meters. Visibility dropped to under 2 nautical miles 3 times during the recovery window. The Milius's crew spent the first 36 hours of the operation establishing a debris field perimeter using hull-mounted sonar and surface search radar while attempting to minimize their present signature in an area that Russian naval surveillance assets were certainly monitoring, given that the MiG-31K's loss would have been tracked by Russian radar within minutes of the engagement. The operational security challenge was significant. An American guided missile destroyer conducting what was obviously a deliberate search and recovery operation 178 miles off the Alaskan coast in international waters near where a Russian military aircraft had just gone down would not go unnoticed. 2 Russian Tu-14, 2 maritime patrol aircraft conducted observation passes of the Milius during the recovery operation. At distances, the ship's command log recorded as approximately 42 miles on the first pass and 28 miles on the second. The passes occurred on days 2 and 3 of the operation. No harassment or interference was attempted, but the Russian side was clearly watching and logging what was happening. A commercial salvage dive team under emergency Navy contract brought out from Dutch Harbor, Alaska, on a support vessel commandeered from a contracted logistics operator, reached the Milius on day 2 of the operation. The divers worked in conditions that stretched the operational safety limits of their thermal protection equipment. Water at -1 Celsius limits effective working time underwater, even with the best available thermal protection. Working in intervals, the team recovered the Kinzhal's guidance package components beginning on day 4. Full recovery of all assessed significant components was certified on day 6, March 22, 2024. The estimated total cost of the 6-day recovery operation, extracted from unclassified budget line items in a separate FOIA request filed by the same research consortium, came to approximately $11.3 million in direct mission expenses. The package was flown to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where the Air Force Research Laboratory's Advanced Propulsion and Guidance Analysis Directorate maintains classified examination facilities, on a C-17 that departed Dutch Harbor on March 23rd under a manifest that listed the cargo only as technical materials, controlled government property. I spent considerable time working through the declassified documents from the FOIA release, and the detail that kept pulling me back is buried in a footnote on page 38 of the NORAD Technical Annex. It summarizes the initial laboratory findings in language so compressed it almost slides past. Quote, "Recovered terminal guidance architecture differs from primary intelligence community assessment in configuration and apparent design intent. Assessment revision warranted." End quote. That single sentence, in the dry vocabulary of classified intelligence reporting, represents an acknowledgement that 4 years of American defense planning around the Kinzhal threat had been operating on a partially incorrect foundation. What the recovered hardware actually revealed about the Kinzhal's guidance system contradicted several core assumptions that had shaped American hypersonic defense investment since Putin's 2018 unveiling of the weapon. The prevailing intelligence community assessment, the one that had informed approximately $4.7 billion in counter-hypersonic research funding, held that the Kinzhal used a dual-mode terminal guidance architecture combining inertial navigation for the cruise phase with an active radar seeker for terminal acquisition of fixed and mobile targets. That assessment was built from signals intelligence collections, technical analysis of Russian weapons program acquisition patterns, and design lineage inference from related Russian systems. The recovered hardware told a different story about this specific Kinzhal variant. The terminal seeker section recovered from the debris field appeared to use a GPS-aided inertial navigation package without the active radar seeker component that intelligence assessments had projected. The implications of that difference are significant in ways that aren't immediately obvious. An active radar seeker in a terminal guidance system is flexible. It can acquire and track moving targets. It's resistant to GPS jamming. It allows the weapon to hunt for targets within a designated area rather than requiring pre-programmed precise coordinates. A GPS-aided inertial guidance system without an active seeker is accurate against fixed known targets. It can be programmed to hit a specific point with high precision, but it has a known vulnerability profile. GPS signals can be jammed. GPS signals can be spoofed, presenting the weapon's navigation system with false positional data. The technical approaches for doing both already exist within American inventory, not fully developed against Kinzhal-specific parameters and frequencies, but the pathway for exploitation was now clearly defined. This was not a backdoor in the traditional sense. It wasn't a design flaw the Russians introduced carelessly. It appears to reflect a design decision that optimized the weapon for a specific mission set, strikes against fixed high-value infrastructure, at the cost of the flexibility that an active seeker would provide. For 4 years, American planners had been funding capabilities to address a different threat profile. What this tells us about the nature of hypersonic weapons intelligence is worth pausing on. Russia spent enormous political capital on the narrative that the Kinzhal represented a genuinely invincible system. Putin's 2018 presentation was designed specifically to communicate that American technological superiority had been overcome in a domain where it had previously been taken for granted. That narrative shaped how American officials, defense researchers, and the broader public understood the threat. The classified reality was more complicated from day one. And the gap between the narrative Russia constructed and the actual technical characteristics of the deployed weapon became exploitable the moment American engineers had hardware to examine. What the March 15th engagement enabled, through the debris recovery it made possible, was a forcing function that compressed years of theoretical intelligence work into a physical examination. The strategic lesson cuts across both sides. Deployed weapon systems diverge from their public presentations. That gap is where adversarial analysis lives. The Kinzhal narrative was partly right. The weapon is fast, maneuverable, and genuinely challenging against existing ground-based interceptor architectures. The parts of the narrative that were wrong were precisely the parts that mattered most for finding an exploitable response. Here's the take that will probably generate some pushback. The Pentagon's decision to classify this engagement for 21 months was correct tactically and arguably wrong democratically. The tactical case for classification is straightforward, revealing that F-22 Raptors could successfully intercept a Kinzhal-equipped MiG-31K at 178 miles would immediately prompt Russian program modifications across the board. Profile changes for future sorties, enhanced electronic countermeasures, modified launch parameters, The intelligence value of the recovered guidance hardware depended critically on Russian planners not knowing that their terminal seeker had been physically examined and cataloged by American engineers. But the democratic cost was real and measurable. For 21 months, American public debate about hypersonic defense investment, including congressional hearings, budget justifications, and public advocacy for expensive new interceptor programs, was happening without the most important data point available. Programs proposing entirely new dedicated hypersonic interceptor architectures, with development cost projections exceeding $6 billion in some estimates, were making arguments in public forums that the March 2024 engagement directly undermined. The existing F-22 platform, combined with existing AIM-12OD inventory, had already demonstrated the platform denial concept worked. Whether the classification trade-off was worth it depends on how you weigh tactical intelligence preservation against informed democratic deliberation on defense budgets running to tens of billions of dollars. Our read is that the timeline was too long by roughly 9 months. 12 months would have preserved the core intelligence value of the guidance hardware analysis. The additional 9 months of secrecy bought marginal tactical benefit while distorting public debate on programs with real fiscal consequences. The 2 pilots who flew that engagement received classified commendations. Their names are still redacted. That's a smaller complaint. But it's part of the same calculation about what a democratic society is owed when its military successfully defends its airspace. What do you think? Did 21 months of classification serve the national security interest? Or did the American public deserve to know sooner that this response capability existed and was proven? Comment below. The debate is more nuanced than it first appears, and the comments on this one have been worth reading. Now back to the engagement timeline and what happened to the programs that followed it. The Air Force quietly accelerated a classified modification program for the F-22 fleet's AN/AP G-77 AESA radar software in the second quarter of 2024. The modification's specific parameters remain classified, but the budget request funding it, extracted from unclassified appropriations documentation by defense spending analyst groups, totaled $847 million across a 3-year implementation program. That's a significant investment for what the appropriations language describes as a radar software enhancement to an existing system. Significant enough that defense analysts who tracked the expenditure without knowing the March 2024 context described it publicly as puzzling. The F-22 radar was already considered the most capable airborne fire control sensor in the American inventory. What improvement justified that scale of investment on a mature system? In context, the investment reads as an upgrade specifically informed by what the Bering Sea engagement and the recovered Kinzhal hardware revealed about the threat response envelope. NORAD also accelerated deployment of additional over-the-horizon radar infrastructure in the Alaska region through 2024 and 2025. The OTH radar expansion program was funded at $312 million and publicly attributed to general Arctic situational awareness requirements. The program timeline, traceable through appropriations language and procurement notices, correlates closely with decisions made in the second quarter of 2024. The USS Milius returned to its patrol schedule on April 2, 2024, after completing its post-recovery maintenance period at Pearl Harbor. The ship's commanding officer, Commander Jason Whitfield, submitted a separate after-action report on the recovery operation. That document was not part of the FOIA release and remains classified. What it contained about the operational security challenges of conducting a debris recovery under Russian surveillance observation is presumably detailed and probably significant. The crew members who participated in the dive recovery received a unit commendation. Classified. The civilian salvage contractors who supported the operation received their contract payment and signed non-disclosure agreements covering the nature of the material recovered. Everyone who was there knows what they did. Almost none of them can say so publicly. There's one more element from the declassified documents that the FOIA reviewers appear to have released without fully appreciating its implications. And it may be the most significant thread in the entire story. After the engagement, after the debris recovery, after the initial exploitation of the recovered hardware at Wright-Patterson, A senior-level assessment within the American intelligence community had to address a question the engagement raised in a form no one had previously been required to answer. The intercept established that F-22 Raptors could, under specific conditions, successfully engage a Kinzhal-equipped MiG-31K before weapon release. But the conditions on March 15th were specific in a way the analysts noted immediately. The Foxhound crew had not employed electronic countermeasures. They had not conducted terrain masking ingress or low-altitude approach to complicate radar geometry. They had not used the frequency-agile communications jamming that is standard doctrine for Russian aircraft operating in contested airspace. They had flown a profile that, viewed in retrospect, appeared almost optimized for American intercept geometry. Was that an operational failure by the Russian side? Poor mission planning? An inexperienced crew? Or was it something else? The NORAD analysis section of the declassified document contains a paragraph that appears to have been inadvertently left unredacted. The classification reviewer who processed the FOIA response apparently assessed it as insufficiently specific to warrant redaction. In context, it's more significant than it first appears. The paragraph reads, quoted directly from the declassified document, "Post-engagement SIGINT correlation suggests the crew's situational awareness was degraded prior to ADIZ penetration, possibly due to communication interruption originating from a source that remains under separate counterintelligence investigation." Communication interruption. Counterintelligence investigation. The text stops there. The following page carries a full-page redacted stamp. If that paragraph means what it appears to mean, the March 15th engagement may not have been purely an American operational success story. There may have been a contribution from a third actor whose role remains classified under a separate counterintelligence compartment that exists independently of the air engagement documentation. That thread remains open. The separate counterintelligence investigation referenced in the paragraph has not been publicly acknowledged, let alone resolved. Whether it involves a signal intercept, a human intelligence source, or something else entirely is unknown. What is observable is the outcome. A Kinzhal-equipped MiG-31K flew into American sensor range and was intercepted before weapon release. Whatever the contributing factors, the result is documented. We cut the full analysis of that SIGINT correlation from this episode for sourcing reasons. The open-source documentation doesn't provide enough foundation for responsible specifics beyond what the declassified paragraph itself states. If you want a full investigation of the counterintelligence angle when more becomes available publicly, comment CI angle below. We track what the audience wants to see developed, and we come back to threads when the sourcing supports it. The central question the March 15th engagement raises isn't whether a Kinzhal can be stopped. This engagement answered that under specific conditions. The question is what both sides learned and how that learning shapes the competition going forward. The Russian side's observable response in the months after March 2024 is partially legible from open-source analysis. MiG-31K operations out of Anadyr and other Arctic-adjacent bases continued through 2024 and into 2025. Sortie frequency declined measurably in the April through June 2024 period, roughly 30 to 40% below the preceding 6 months average based on open-source flight tracking data and NORAD public notification patterns. Whether that reduction reflects operational adjustment to the March loss, maintenance cycles, budgetary constraints, or some combination is not determinable from available public data. By fall 2024, sortie rates had returned to levels broadly consistent with the 2023 pattern. No public Russian acknowledgement of the loss has appeared in any open-source database, official statement, or commemorative context. The crew members of the downed MiG-31K do not appear in Russian military casualty databases that have become partially observable through monitoring of official commemoration notices. What the Russian side learned technically from the March 15th engagement is partially inferable. They know a MiG-31K was lost in the Alaska ADIZ on that date. They know American fighters were responsible. What they may not know with precision is whether the loss resulted purely from F-22 BVR engagement, or whether the communication degradation noted in the NORAD counterintelligence reference played a role. Intelligence assessments from the 2024 to 2025 period, partially referenced in unclassified testimony to the Senate Armed Services Committee, suggest accelerated testing activity for Kinzhal variant modifications, consistent with what a program office would do after a combat loss. Whether those modifications address the specific guidance architecture vulnerability suggested by the recovered hardware is unknown from public sources. If the recovered hardware analysis was exploited against the GPS-aided guidance configuration, and Russian engineers subsequently modified toward an active radar seeker terminal phase, the exploitation window may already have closed. That's the nature of weapons intelligence. The window opened by the March 15th recovery was real and was exploited. Whether it remains open today is a different question. The most surprising aspect of this entire episode, after going through several hundred pages of documents from various FOIA releases, isn't the engagement itself. American F-22s intercepting Russian aircraft approaching Alaska is exactly what they were built and positioned to do. The surprise is how much the engagement's aftershocks reveal about the gap between public defense debate and classified operational reality. Consider this. During the period when March 15, 2024 was classified and unknown to the public, multiple well-regarded defense analysts published substantial pieces arguing that the American military lacked credible near-term options for countering Kinzhal-equipped platforms. Those analyses shaped congressional debate. They influenced budget negotiations. They were cited in advocacy for specific capability development programs that cost real money. All of that happened while the operational reality of the March 15th engagement sat in classified files at NORAD headquarters. The analysts weren't wrong to write what they wrote, given what was publicly known. But the decision to classify the engagement for 21 months meant the most important single data point for that debate was systematically withheld from the people whose job was to make decisions based on it. That's a structural problem that goes beyond this specific incident, but this incident illustrates it with unusual clarity. There was a third challenge to the March 15th operation that the declassified documents address in less detail than the aerial engagement and debris recovery, but which was arguably as operationally complex as either. Managing the information environment immediately after the engagement. Within 4 hours of the MiG-31K's destruction, NORAD's Public Affairs section was receiving queries from 2 separate commercial aviation tracking services whose monitoring infrastructure had detected anomalous military traffic in the Alaska ADIZ region during the engagement window. The queries were procedural and did not reflect specific knowledge of what had occurred, but they needed responses that were accurate enough to be credible and vague enough to preserve classification. The approved public line, coordinated with the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Staff within 3 hours of the engagement, described the evening's NORAD activity as routine intercept operations in the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone, consistent with standard sovereign airspace protection protocols. It was a statement that was technically accurate while describing nothing. The Russian side made no public statement, no accusation, no demand for explanation of a missing aircraft. That silence itself carries information. It suggests the Russian military and government made a deliberate decision that acknowledging the loss publicly would cost more than absorbing it quietly. That calculus is interesting. Russia had publicly built the Kinzhal's invincibility into its strategic communication framework. Acknowledging that an F-22 had intercepted a Kinzhal-armed platform before weapon release, and that American forces had recovered hardware from the wreckage, would have directly contradicted the public narrative Putin had personally constructed. The political cost of that contradiction likely outweighed whatever operational or diplomatic benefit a public protest might have generated. So both sides kept quiet, for different reasons, with different things they were protecting. The result was 21 months of an air engagement that represents a genuine milestone in hypersonic weapons competition, sitting outside the boundary of informed public debate about the programs that should have been directly informed by it. One detail from the NORAD telemetry documents that stuck with me is the timestamp on the intercept order's operational status reference at the moment the scramble was issued at 3:47 a.m. on March 15th. At that moment, the United States was officially at DEFCON 3, elevated from peacetime DEFCON 4 since February 2022. 2 years of continuous elevated alert status tied to the conflict in Ukraine and its implications for American-Russian military posture globally. DEFCON 3 means armed forces are ready to mobilize in 15 minutes. It means warning systems are running at elevated sensitivity. It means the 2 pilots who strapped into those Raptors in the pre-dawn darkness were operating under rules of engagement calibrated for the possibility that any given intercept might be the opening moment of something much larger. Here's the part that doesn't sit comfortably, even now. The American playbook for Alaska. ADIZ intercepts had been, for decades, built around visual identification and controlled escort. You show presence, you signal intent, you let the Russians turn back. You don't shoot. March 15, 2024 broke that playbook. A Raptor crew made a weapons release decision against a Russian military aircraft and executed it. The first time that had happened in the post-Cold War period. If peacetime still means anything when you've been at DEFCON 3 for 2 straight years, that's a threshold crossed. It doesn't announce itself in the public record because the classification kept it quiet. But in the long sequence of American-Russian military competition, the moment 2 AIM-12OD missiles left their pylons pointed at a Russian aircraft over the Bering Sea is a line that doesn't unline itself. The next time NORAD sees a similar flight profile, the decision framework for the alert crew includes the precedent of March 15th. That changes the calculation in ways that extend far beyond the specific engagement. Put yourself in Falcon 1's position for a moment. Marginal track quality. 90-second window. A weapon you've never fired in combat. A target whose destruction would remain classified and unacknowledged for almost 2 years. You're making a call at 4:04 a.m. that the 2 governments involved in your engagement will both pretend, publicly, didn't happen. That's an extraordinary thing to ask of anyone. He made the right call, and then, effectively, had to forget it ever happened for 21 months. March 15, 2024, lasted 11 minutes from scramble to splash. The documentation of what it meant is still incomplete. The counterintelligence angle referenced in the unredacted paragraph remains classified. The full scope of the Guidance Vulnerability Exploitation Program is classified. What the recovered hardware told American engineers about the Kinzhal's design trajectory and the implications for follow-on variants is classified. The separate investigation into the communication degradation that apparently affected the Foxhound crew before ADA's penetration is classified. But the core fact is now on record. 2 American pilots, callsign Falcon 1 and Falcon 2, flying F-22. A Raptors out of Joint Base. Elmendorf-Richardson, Alaska, intercepted and eliminated a Russian MiG-31K Foxhound carrying an armed KH-47M2 Kinzhal hypersonic missile 178 miles off the Alaskan coastline. They did it in darkness at -31 degrees Fahrenheit with a marginal tracking solution against an accelerating timeline in a 90-second window. They did it clean. The Kinzhal never left the aircraft. Alaska never knew it was coming. The incident was buried for 21 months. Now you know it happened. If you want more from jet supremacy on declassified intercept operations, Arctic defense architecture, and the documented state of hypersonic competition between American and Russian air power, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Every video on this channel is built from primary source documents, FOIA releases, appropriations records, and open source technical analysis. Not speculation, not secondhand reporting. The story you just heard came from 47 pages of raw NORAD radar telemetry and the work of a defense research consortium willing to fight for FOIA compliance. That's the standard here. We don't do easy. Next week, we're going into the F-15EX Eagle II's classified engagement record in the Pacific Theater. The F-22 gets the headlines. The Eagle II has been doing the quiet work in a theater that matters more to the next decade of American security than the Bering Strait does. What the recently released operational data shows is more surprising than the public coverage suggests. That's next week on Jet Supremacy. We'll see you there.